there's all this funny parts, and then the movie ends with a message. Correct. Very true.
The Mask.
The Mask was funny, and that was very physical, extremely physical. The man's face is so agile and mobile. So that's the kind of person he was. This is the kind of movie he made. So The Mask was a good suggestion. Mr. Bean, similar to the Mask. Thank you. Thank you.
Big Bang Theory.
Sorry, who was that?
The Big Bang Theory.
Big Bang Theory is a show is funny. It's nerdy humor. I mean, I'm sure that a lot of people who understand it. I don't. My wife loves it. I don't really get some of the jokes, but yeah, it's humorous. Mr. Bean, like Houseful and Home Alone. Again, extremely physical types of comedy. Now, why was it that we still haven't answered the question fully? Why humor matters? And let me ask friends. Yes, I think we're done. Jaane Bhi Yaro. That's a story from
amazing movie
from years ago. Yeah, Jaane Bhi Yaro, and all those stories of friends getting together. Yes. So let's table the question of what was funny, what in our lives was funny. Let's get back to the question of why being funny matters. Right, Akshata? I get it. We moved on.
Can I answer?
Mahindra, that's the last question we're going to get you to let you answer. Let's go for it.
Why humor is important?
You have to take patapat. You can't take too much time. Let's go.
It's reducing tension.
Reducing tension. All right. So now that's it. We're going to move on to the actual. Let's have a discussion. Give me 1 second, everyone. All right.
Who's a funny boy?
We're going to involve our son in this speech because he feels that he wants to be funny as well. So why does being funny matter, right? Now, there is a saying in Toastmasters, and everybody's heard this. We say it nearly every meeting you go to, you hear this. And what is that? Feedback is the breakfast of champions. No, that's not what I want to say, actually. That's the phrase you hear every time. But the real truth of Toastmasters and speech making is that people don't remember what you say. They remember what you make them feel. And that's one thing that Toastmasters has become very, very adept at and drilling into our heads, that it's important to make people feel a certain way at the end of your speech. And I think humor forms that bridge between the speaker and the audience. When you make the person laugh, it remains memorable to that person, your content, your message, your ideas. Vinny, I'm in the middle of a call, buddy. Give me 1 second, everyone. I'll be right back. I wish I had a joke lined up, but I don't. So I'm going to come back to the topic at hand itself. The bridge between the speaker and the audience and the way you make them feel through humor is a powerful way of making sure that your message stays with the audience even after your speech ends. For example, you listen to all these speakers who give very, very serious speeches. There are technical speeches that you listen to at work. You might have all these really serious speeches that people give, but they're not the speeches whose content you'll remember in 2 weeks. What you'll remember in 2 weeks, if there was humor in that, are the jokes and the sense of humor and the camaraderie that you built up with everyone around you while listening to those jokes. And that's why being funny matters. And I think somebody said that also, to bridge that connection between the speaker and the audience. But there is more. The other reason why being funny matters is that it creates an alternative view of looking at the same thing. Let's take an example, right? When they were, back in the day when there were kings and queens, there used to be a court jester. And a court jester was not just to do slapstick comedy and make physical jokes about how silly they are and fall down and hit their faces against the floor. That was one type of humor. But what a court jester's job was to present the ridiculous aspects of court life and civic life in front of the audience and in front of the king, so that the king understood and the audience was able to understand what was being said and what is being experienced by the people in the community. Now that is another use of humor. The humor lets you present a slightly different take on life that you would not otherwise be able to do if you were to just explain something in a straightforward way. There is satire, there is shows like Daily Show and this Last Week Tonight, which break down what is going on in your daily life and present them in a way that makes it a little bit more obvious to you that, oh, there is something ridiculous happening. There's something which needs to be understood from a slightly different point of view, a slight different take on the society we're living in. And that's what humor does. It gives you an opportunity to present something in a special way and then make it clear to the person that, oh, there is something ridiculous happening. There's something worth satirizing and worth discussing and worth noticing about the way we're living our lives right now, right? So that's another reason for why being funny matters. The first thing is, when you're funny, you create a connection between the speaker and the audience. The second reason why you need to be funny is, I'm so sorry. Kids, they're going to constantly, Home Alone. It's like, my life is like Home Alone right now. I feel that he's going to drop something on his head and then I have to take him to the hospital next. All right, back to the three things why being funny matters. One, the bridge between the speaker and the audience. The second thing why being funny matters is that it creates a feeling in the audience. It gives them something to remember, something that they can carry forward because they remember how you make them feel, remember? And then the final reason is that being funny gives you an alternative viewpoint into life, right? How am I doing on time? I'm sorry, I'm panting a little. I was running around. So timer, Madam Timer, Jamie, how am I doing on time? Give me a number. What number am I at? How many minutes have I gone on?
You still have around 20 minutes.
I have 20 minutes, plenty of time. All right, so while I'm doing that, let me tell you a joke. Let me start with the last, what number is this? What happened to my, the third item on the agenda is this thing called Sierra AC. So let's talk about that. But before we do that, I'm going to tell you a joke. Now, and before I do that, I would like to make sure everybody's videos are on, because it's not funny when you're just telling jokes to yourself on the screen. So can people please turn on their videos? Arvind, Asim, Arjun, Priscilla, everyone, whoever's video is not turned on, can I please have their videos on? And I'll switch to gallery view so I can see people when I'm telling this joke. All right, I see videos turning on. All right, so my wife and I, we met on the, because of the internet. She was my GeoFiber installer. Oh man, this audience is a tough audience. My wife and I met on the internet because of the internet, and she was my GeoFiber installer. Now, the key thing to humor, and this is the part where you can actually start taking notes and figuring out how you can incorporate humor into your speeches, is the element of surprise. You start off with a statement. My wife and I met because of the internet. And for a lot of us, the answer to this statement, how did we meet? We met on the internet, is because they either met on Tinder, or they met on Bharat Matrimony, or they met on any of those websites, or they might have met because they were doing some project together at work and they met up on the internet, and so on and so forth. But what I ended up telling you was that no, I didn't meet her because of any of those reasons that you are probably thinking in your head. But the reason we met is because she was my GeoFiber installer, which is also an interpretation and an outcome of saying that we met because of the internet. We met because I asked someone to come and install the internet. It turned out that this woman who ended up being my wife was my installer, and hence that situation is funny because it is a surprise. You start off thinking, oh, this guy must have met his wife to be on Tinder, but no, it is even before that. He had to get internet installed, and he got GeoFiber installed, and his wife was the person doing installing. Which is also funny in a second way, because in India, it's not very common for installers to be women. I mean, I don't think so far I've met women bus drivers, I've met women auto drivers, I've met women Uber drivers, but never a woman internet installer. So that's a surprising thing as well. So that's what you need to remember, that all humor takes you in a certain direction and then takes you somewhere else. And that's element of surprise, that hinge point of surprise, is where you can find humor in your speeches as well. Say, for example, you're giving a speech today about, in your humorous speech contest or any speech, you're giving a speech about the foods of your hometown. You're from a place which is famous for its, let's take, you're from New Delhi, and then New Delhi has this parathe wali gali or something, and then you have this speech about food. So you give a speech about food and you make a quick U-turn while giving that speech, that I love food, especially if somebody else is making it. So that's humor, because you could always talk about you being interested in cooking yourself, or you could say, if somebody else is making my food, that's funny as well. So that's the first element of humor, the surprise. That's the S in the Sierra AC. Sierra's C. And now that S is surprise, and that's this surprise. You look for it everywhere.
This the one, no?
Please mute Mahendra. That's possible. Yes, great. So the first thing that you need to remember is that the element of surprise is what makes a line or a speech or a joke funny. You are going a certain direction, you turn directions, and that's the element of surprise. But that surprise can encompass a lot of things. You can be a huge array of things that you can introduce surprise into. For example, in slapstick humor, you might find it surprising that this person was. Let's take the example of Tom and Jerry. You have many examples of Tom and Jerry where he's running, and suddenly he falls off the edge of a cliff or falls off the edge of a building, and he's still going forward because he's going so fast that he's running in air. And that is a little surprising. And then he looks down and he falls down. That is surprising to us as the audience, because the first time we see it, when I jump off the edge of a building, I go straight down. But when Tom runs off the edge of the building, he's able to go forward for a few steps before he realizes that he has to fall down. That is surprising. So this element of surprise is all of it. Like, all of humor is built on how to figure out how to introduce surprise into your speech. Now, the rest of the letters in this acronym of Sierra's AC is a little bit of a breakdown and deep dive into the keyword surprise. Remember that surprise is what you need, but there are different elements of surprise that you can figure out, or you can introduce into your speech. Now, the next thing is Sierra, SI, right? Now, the I of Sierra stands for incongruity. Now, incongruity, when does that happen? When you are thinking of something, when you are introducing human ideas into things which don't usually have human thought. Let's take an example. How many of you have heard this phrase, don't judge a book by its cover? I'm sure many of us have thought of it. Many of us would have heard of it. We believe it, that, you shouldn't judge a book by its cover. If a book's cover looks good, doesn't always mean that the story is good as well. Now, what if books had the same question? Do you think books believe the same thing about people? That you should not judge a person by the other books they have on their bookshelf? Do you think books sit and judge us based on the fact that we might have a cookbook and a self-help book called Internet for Dummies? Does that book think that we are all dummies because we have books called Internet for Dummies? There is incongruity. You are starting off with something which you know to be true for yourself, and then you insert something which is completely wacky. Like, you would never think whether books are judging you the same way you're judging books or not, right? That is incongruity. That is, if in your speeches, if you're giving a speech where you're talking about, let's talk about chapatis and food. Let's go back to the example of chapatis and food. So when we make chapatis, we use that balan, and we flatten out dough, and you make it flat, and then you put it on the fire, and then you cook it. Now, can you imagine what a chapati could be asking? Let's take a poll. When it comes to cooking and making chapatis, what do you think what human things do we do that the chapati can also be expected to think for us? Like, is there anything you can think of? You're going to put a flattened piece of dough on fire, and you're going to heat it and bake it and cook it and then burn it. What do you think the chapati is thinking in that moment?
We're cruel.
Cruel. So that is an example. It doesn't have to be a full-fledged joke today. But as you think about your speeches, every time you pick up a situation where you are feeling a certain way, and you then flip it around and say, oh, if I'm feeling a certain way, what if the person I'm doing this to is also feeling the same thing? How do I use that to inject humor in my speech? Take an example that if you again talking about your wife and your interactions with your wife, you might have an impression that your wife is a horrible driver. And that's a very common theme, a common meme that we have, that women are worse drivers. Between men and women, all men think that women are worse drivers. Now, if you were to flip that and say, what do you think the car says when I'm driving, and I'm driving in the way I think appropriate, while my wife is driving, and how does she feel? How does the car feel when she is driving versus when I'm driving? There are questions to be asked, and ideas to be investigated in those spaces where you know what you think, flip it around and say, I like driven by her. I feel driven. That's a good one. We can start with that as a joke. But keep that in mind, that the incongruity comes from putting your human sentiments on something which doesn't have those sentiments, like a book or a car or a chapati or any of those things. Don't really think, but if you introduce that and ask the question, yes, go ahead, Jamie.
So I recently happened to hear about cockroaches looking at us. So they always form these groups, and then all of a sudden we bump into their, drug dealing, and then they all spread in different areas.
That's a fantastic example. It's an example of what we experience, and you're going to see another example of this coming up. But it's exactly what we see in that's an incongruous situation where you also always assume that people were sitting together and talking to each other, or gossiping, and we feel excluded from it. So you can maybe explore that aspect of seeing a cockroach, a gathering of cockroaches. That why am I not being part of that? Because if you are not all of us have felt this when we were growing up. Like when we were in school, whether you always worried whether our friends were having meetings behind our back and not inviting us to those parties and those big events that they used to have. You always had that worry. Now imagine that same situation with a bunch of cockroaches. They're having these secret meetings where we're not invited. We're not part of their group. We're not. Are they judging us for not being part of the group? So those are the things that's the incongruity that comes from the humor that comes from incongruity of imposing human sentiments on something which does not usually have those, right? The third thing, the third letter of humor, we've already covered surprise, which is you're going a certain way, flip the directions. Incongruity is when you put human sentiments and human ideas or things you're familiar with in unfamiliar situations and then explore it a little bit more. For example, the cockroaches drug dealing in Jamie's house. I don't want to know what happens in Jamie's house, but it sounds a little sketchy. So the third aspect of humor is the embarrassment. And before we go to embarrassment, let me tell you a story. Okay. Now, I am much older than a millennial. I'm a 1979 born. So I don't know if that counts as millennial or not, but I'm going to assume that I'm older than a lot of people here, right? What I've learned a lot of things, but one thing I've still not been able to master is the ability to take a Rapido ride. The other day, I had to come back home late at night, 11 at night, from an open mic where I had decided to go and perform my jokes. And on the way back, there was no bus to come back home. I usually prefer public transport that late at night, but I couldn't find a bus. So I was just waiting there and trying to figure out how to get back home. And I so happened to order a Rapido ride. Does everybody know what Rapido is? Okay, for people who don't know, Rapido is basically just like you can call an Uber for cars, you can also call a Rapido for motorcycles. So you sit behind someone on a motorcycle and they bring you home, just like an Uber ride. Okay, Uber and Ola. Now I was sitting there and thinking, and please remember, I'm a middle-aged man, and I'm sitting there at 11 o'clock at night, and I'm thinking, should I call a bike ride? I've never ridden behind somebody in a bike. The last time I sat in a bike was in college, and I was feeling very embarrassed about it, that I would have to sit behind someone, put my hand on their shoulder to climb onto the bike. I'd have to sit pillion with them. I don't know. And when I was growing up, we used to sit close to each other. The person riding and the person behind used to be friends. So we used to lean on their shoulder and we used to talk to each other while driving. And I didn't know if we were still able to do that with a Rapido driver. Are you supposed to cuddle up with them when you're driving? So that sense of, and I was having all those thoughts when I finally decided to bite the bullet and call the Rapido ride. And it turned out that the Rapido driver, the fare was 69 rupees. And I decided not to take the Rapido at all because I was just too scared that I would be accused of being a little too physical with a person at 11 o'clock at night. So I didn't take the Rapido ride. Now, what I've told you now is part of a larger set of jokes. And what you are experiencing alongside me is embarrassment. I am telling you something which is embarrassing to me. I was standing there at 11 o'clock at night, not able to get back home, not able to decide whether I should take a Rapido ride and sit with someone who was not familiar with me on a bike. I didn't know how to interact with that person. Should I speak to that person? Should I cuddle up with that person? Should I sit close to that person? Should I sit far away from that person? I was telling you a lot of things about what thoughts were going on in my head. And you were embarrassed for me. I was embarrassing myself by having so many questions to ask and so many questions I couldn't answer. And alongside that, he was like, yeah, I agree. It's happened to me too. I've felt this too. But should I be sitting behind someone? Should I get close to that person if I'm riding? Let's take an Uber itself. There are so many questions that come up with an Uber ride. Are we supposed to sit in the front seat? Are we supposed to sit at the back seat? Are we supposed to sit behind the driver? Are we supposed to sit diagonally across from the driver? Should we put on our seatbelt ourselves? Because those are questions that you have to ask yourself. If I put on my seatbelt and in India, nobody puts on their seatbelt in the rear seat, will the person yell at me? Will the driver tell me, oh, no, don't worry about it. You don't need to worry about seatbelts in India. Will they tell me that? Or can I trust myself to feel safe? I feel safer with the seatbelt on. Those thoughts, those moments you're putting yourself in which is not familiar to, which is, wait, it is familiar to everyone. It's just that you don't talk about them outside, maybe with very close friends. That embarrassment, that secondhand embarrassment that the audience feels, makes it funny to them. They are experiencing embarrassment alongside you. You are embarrassing yourself. They are saying, yeah, man, those are tough questions, and I don't know how this guy did it. Right? That embarrassment, if you explore that a little more in your jokes and your speeches, will make your speech better. Oh, green, man, I'm running. How did it go 20 minutes left to suddenly green? Are you telling me I'm speaking too much? Anyway, so yeah, so embarrassment is the third element of humor that you can introduce. If you, in your own speeches, if you talk about how, say you have a guest who comes home and your wife or your spouse, or you're responsible for making chai for that person, and you're like, I don't know how to make chai. I don't know if I have the confidence to make good chai for my guests. That is something worth exploring. That is embarrassment. That's secondhand embarrassment that you can use in your speeches and then say, this becomes funny because you're discussing things which are not always discussed in polite circles. The embarrassment that you feel internally, right? That covers SIE. Now let's go to the two R's. The first R that I want to talk to you about is Sierra. Yeah, is release. Now, there are moments which are very serious moments in life, right? Death in the family. My parents might pass away, close relatives might pass away. There might be severe and very, very hurtful events that are happening in the world around you. For example, 9/11 happened when 3,000 people were killed in a single day in New York City and a few other cities in the US. Then similarly in India, the prime minister of the country was assassinated in 1991. And 1984, the prime minister was assassinated. So those are severe, strong, wrenching moments for people. And when you make jokes about those, when you find humor in those, that's when you're able to make that thing worth talking about, and you open up that thing for conversation. Let's take an example of a joke that I found on the internet. This guy whose stuff I like a lot. His name is Dr. James Corley, and he calls himself the joke doctor. He made a joke about the passing of Pope John Paul II. And the joke went something like this: that, oh man, when Pope John Paul died, a lot of people uh, uh, attended his funeral procession. They prayed for his passing, and they prayed for his passing into heaven. And his joke was something like, if Pope John Paul needs so many people to pray for him before he can go to heaven, the rest of us are doomed, because there is no way we're going to get into heaven, because there are not so many people are going to pray for us. And if Pope John Paul needs help to get into heaven, the rest of us are screwed, and there's no point trying to get to heaven, right? This is funny because the death of a pope is significant to a lot of Catholic Christians across the world. There are hundreds of millions, maybe even a billion plus Catholic Christians who hold the Pope as a pillar of their lives. And if you make a joke about his passing, and you make a joke about his passing in a way which is not offensive, not hurtful, who still accords him the respect that he deserves as a leader of a billion plus people, and you still make a joke, that gives you release, that opens it up to look at a situation which is as fraught and wrenching as the death of a leader of men in a slightly funny way, and make jokes about it. That's the release. And if you can make a joke about a sticky situation while maintaining its sanctity, you might argue that even things don't need to maintain the sanctity either. A joke is a joke. If you can't take a joke about something which is severe, you cannot make jokes about things which are simple as well. But that's a conversation for a different date. But please remember that the release is another aspect of joke making. If you find something, if you make jokes about sexual assault in your speeches, if you make a joke about misogyny, or if you make a joke about dowry deaths in your speeches, if you make a joke about the patriarchy that is implied in me expecting my wife to make chai for me when I come back home from work or something, that's patriarchy. If you make a joke about that, that gives you release as the audience. That, oh yeah, if you can make a joke about patriarchy, you can make a joke about a lot of things, right? Now let's jump right on, because I think I'm still on green, so I want to make sure I give some time for Q&A and for some discussions. Wait, let me make sure I have the second R is the one I keep forgetting. So let me make sure I have it. Oops, what happened? Right. And this was something that somebody actually said, Jamie brought it up not so long ago about the cockroaches. What is funny is recognition. When you realize something is happening around you, which is weird, odd, strange, worth discussing. That is the second R of joke making. When you are you're recognizing something as being absurd, recognizing something as being worth discussing, worth digging into, that makes that the angle that you're going for, the fact that you're discussing something which is not usually discussed, is worth, it brings humor into your speech. You've never discussed cockroaches. You've never ever discussed the response cockroaches have to you as an individual. You're talking about cockroaches meeting in the corner of the room. When you turn on the light, they scatter as if they're all Dawood Ibrahim people meeting to plot terror attacks. But as soon as you turn on the light, they scatter. That is funny because it is not something you normally discuss with friends. Let's take the Rapido example is another example of something you don't really discuss, but it doesn't fall under recognition. It's closer to embarrassment because you're getting embarrassing yourself for the people. But recognition is the identification of something which you don't usually talk about and bringing it out into the open, into a conversation, into a speech, and talking about it during your speech, right? Now, the last couple are a little bit hard to wrap your head around, but the Sierra, the A stands for ambivalence, where you're not sure about what to think about something. Let's take patriarchy. Let's take women's liberation. Let's take all those topics. You know on the surface that you are supposed to support the freedom of women to express themselves, but you don't actively think about it on a 24/7 basis. Maybe you do. You might be an exception. A lot of people don't think about these big things on a daily basis. But if you introduce those topics into your speech in the middle of your speech and force people to stop being ambivalent about it, that is the use of ambivalence in introducing humor into your speech. And what will happen when you introduce humor? You'll be able to connect with your audience better. You'll be able to leave them with something to remember for the rest of their lives. They'll remember the fact that I spoke about my Rapido experience. You'll remember this 2 weeks later. But if I were to give you a long spiel about humor, you'll not remember it. But if I told you about embarrassment and the secondhand embarrassment you feel because of my Rapido speech, that is what's going to happen to you. So the ambivalence, if you talk about something which people are mostly ambivalent about, that is humor as well. The last two are S and C, superiority and configurational. Now, I'll talk about superiority, but again, it's the opposite of embarrassment. If you were to talk about something that happened to you and you let the audience feel that this will not happen to them because they're too smart for it, then you're letting them feel superior to you, and that can be funny in its own way. Let's see if there's any examples of that we can work out together as part of the activity itself. If you can identify an area of superiority where you are putting yourself down, you're making yourself look like an idiot, so that the other person, the audience, can feel like, oh yeah, it never happened to me. The superiority is the counterpoint to embarrassment. Embarrassment is something you say, oh yeah, I have felt this too. This embarrassment is I've felt this. Superiority is when you feel, oh no, this is never going to happen to me. I'm not this kind of a person at all. For example, if I were to talk about how I said something misogynistic, or the first time I met my wife, we met on a date, and I was misogynistic. You'd be like, oh no, I would never do that. I would never make jokes about how women have the correct place for women is in the kitchen. I would never make a joke about that. You'd feel superior to me. If I were to make a joke about that, you'd be, I'm not like Sai at all. I'm much better than him. That superiority is going to be funny. So you look for moments where you can put yourself down and the audience can feel superior to you. Okay, that's the superiority. And the last kind of joke is the one which is the most uncommon. At least in India, it's very uncommon. So let me tell you a joke and let me ask you what you find funny about this. Okay, now you know what rice is. Rice is a great dish for someone who likes something and wants to have 2,000 of them. All right. So there was a comedian whose jokes these are. These are not my jokes. I'll tell you who the name is right after this. Let me tell you another configurational joke. You know, an escalator can never go out of order. At worst, it can become a set of stairs. Right? Now, to understand why this is funny, you have to have a mental picture of what would happen in the world, what it looks like in the real world. You have to understand the setup of an escalator. An escalator which stopped working is basically a set of stairs, right? Those jokes are usually one-liners. You cannot really go very far with them, but they're also funny if you introduce them in your speeches as a one-off. It's worth exploring. Similarly with rice. How do you eat rice? You eat rice. You don't eat rice one grain at a time. You have a mound of rice in your hand and you crush it, and then it becomes multiple grains of rice, and then you eat it. So usually when you say, this is something I like eating, you have one of it. You have maybe one barfi, one peda, one rasgulla, one piece of candy. You don't have 2,000 of them. But rice can only be eaten in 2000s. You cannot have 2 grains of rice and say, I'm done with my rice consumption today. I enjoyed my rice. You will necessarily have to have thousands of them, thousands of grains of rice when you're having your lunch, which makes it funny when you think about it. Like, oh yeah, I usually say I want one piece of candy, or one piece of rice, or one piece of fruit. I never want 2,000 pieces of fruit. That's what makes it funny. Okay, so this is configuration, and this comedian called Mitch Hedberg was infamous worldwide. He committed suicide at a young age because he was just a deeply unsettled person. But his humor was used to be completely like this. Like, you will have rice, you have 2,000 grains of rice, and that's when you have, it's for people like that. Escalator becoming a set of stairs. That is his joke. Let me tell you another one which I liked a lot. I used to do drugs. I still do, but I used to as well. So that is funny because when you say I used to do drugs, the usual response, oh yeah, he stopped doing drugs. He's a good guy. He's giving up on drugs and stuff like that. But then you say, oh no, I used to do drugs. I still do, but used to do it as well. That makes it funny because that you're surprising the audience with this expectation of what was funny and not funny. All right. So I think I've reached my red, which means I've done my 20 minutes. Is that right? Or have I? So can we do an activity now? All right, so let's do an activity, and we can maybe have. Let's do one thing. Let's take a break because I've spoken for so long. Maybe we can take a moment to sort of ask the audience what you guys have gathered from this conversation we had about joke making. So let me ask Vishal, what did you think about? Do you have a better sense of what counts as funny in humor now?
Yeah, I mean, before that, I would like to ask, did you got your installation money back after installing the?
I wish my wife has done that much pull that she can get the installation money back.
Yeah, really, it was quite insightful, frankly.
Right.
And I love watching stand-up comedy. I don't say that I'm very good at comedy, but I like to do.
Right.
Within our own group. I don't go stand-up comedy or something like
Right.
that. But within our own, I try to be funny. But this gives the funny thing a scientific note.
Exactly. And when you're
It
doing
was
telling jokes,
I never thought about that. It has so many deep things in it. And
correct.
to make a joke, to make a person smile, there is a whole science behind it. Yeah.
Yes, and
Thanks for this insightful.
yeah, and once you're ready to do your next set with your friends, see if you can use any of these elements. Put yourself down, make it, identify embarrassing things. And okay, one thing I wasn't very specific about, and I think that I made a mistake there. The more specific you are about in your jokes, the easier it is for the audience to form a picture of what's happening to you in their heads and then laugh about it along with you. If I were to tell you, I took a Rapido and I said it was 11 at night, I was feeling embarrassed. I'm an old middle-aged man who was taking a bike for the first time after many years in college. I used to sit close to my friends when right. So I was giving you all these cues to imagine a young guy sitting on a bike 20 years ago and then today trying to get on a bike again with his hand on somebody's shoulder. So that level of specificity is what makes jokes funny. If people can visualize what's happening in their heads, that makes it funny. And then that way they like what you did and they remember you for a longer time. All right, so let's see if I can get Akshata to talk to us about this session. Were you making notes or were you just making me feel good? I think you're on mute, Akshata.
Yeah, so I was just writing down the pointers,
Right.
which you said. Yeah. So all these pointers have really helped me figure out like how to insert humor in a speech or in your day-to-day life. So suppose a surprising element, or you spoke about incongruity. So specifically, inserting human sentiments uh, in things which do not have human sentiments. We
Right.
usually see this happening, and you find it more funny, when non-living things actually talking to each other, and it gives a fresh perspective, and it's easier to make people laugh.
Right.
And it really helped me understand, how to. It would really help me
For your
in
agency.
yeah.
Great.
Uh,
Jerry Seinfeld is a well-regarded, well-known master in this. Like he was the one who first made this mainstream, this style of humor where he puts human thoughts in inanimate objects. For example, one famous joke of his is when we are at the horse races, we are wanting to see the horse go from start to finish and win the race. But from a horse's perspective, what it's doing is just going from one end of the road, one on the end of the racetrack to the other end, just to eat hay. Because all it wants is hay. It doesn't really care about the purse. It doesn't care about winning. It doesn't care about the jockey. It doesn't care about anything. All it cares about is, when I finish the race, I'm going to get hay. So as long as you can convince your horse that there is a lot of good hay waiting for you, it'll go as fast as you want it to go. So that is, again, that's the kind of humor that he made mainstream. So you can always do that as well. Generally Evaluator Mahendra, you seem super serious here. I didn't see you smile even once. Were my jokes that bad?
No, it's not that actually. I am trying to reflect what I can do in my contest, whenever I will be participating. So I think very valid points from your side.
That's a great segue into what we're going to do next. We're going to try and break down a situation that's happening, which happened very recently, and we're going to see if we can find humor in that. Okay. So if anybody else wants to add something, maybe you can take 1 more minute to do that. Otherwise, we'll switch to doing an activity. Let's see. Shravan, do you want to add something?
Yeah, I was just going through some of the things that Google found. I missed out on the last part you spoke about after superiority. What was the
It's called
entire
configuration.
theorem?
It's configuration.
Okay.
You have to
Okay.
imagine how life is and then find humor in that. Rice, 2,000 grains of rice. Escalator,
Okay.
stairs. So those are, if you say it like that, like, oh man, yeah, escalators do become stairs. You know it. You probably experienced a broken escalator as well, but you never make a joke about it until you do, and then it becomes funny. Okay, so that's configuration. You could, how is life configured? You find humor in that. All right, so now we're going to take maybe 3 minutes to do an activity, which is how to find humor in headlines. Right, we have a headline which is happening right now. We have an Indian Olympian who was disqualified because she missed out on her weigh-in by 100 grams. Vinesh Phogat. So the headline is that Vinesh Phogat was disqualified from her wrestling match, 50 kg wrestling match, because she was over the allowed limit by 100 grams. Now, how do we find humor in that? Because it's a wrenching situation. This woman was in line to at least win a silver, but she got disqualified completely, and she's probably going to miss on all her medals. She was definitely in contention for the bronze if she had not been disqualified, but she's probably going to miss everything, and they're still having discussions around it. But how do you find humor in that? Now, let's take an example of how would you. We've all been to a marketplace. We've all been to a shop where you're buying something, you're buying vegetables, and the market and the shopkeeper is like, you know what? Here's some free kariya patta, 100 grams of kariya patta for you, right? They throw it in the bag with you with everything else. You paid so much, you throw 100 grams of kariya patta in the bag with you, and then you're like, oh man. Now imagine that was what is happening to this person. That she was the night before the weigh-in, she was having chapatis, and she had one extra chapati that night. And that's what tipped her over the tipped her over the 50 kg limit by 100 grams, because the chapati cannot be more than 100 grams. So imagine being that person, like your mom would do it to you. Hey man, you've not eaten in a long while, you've lost so much weight, just one more chapati. And they give you one chapati, and the next day you go for a weigh-in and you're getting disqualified from the Olympics because you're 100 grams overweight. So that is the kind of, so an activity I want to give to you is to look up a headline, find similar situations which reflect that headline in your daily life, and then try to make a joke about it. And you don't have to make long jokes about it. Vinesh Phogat was overweight, over the limit by 100 grams. When we go to the marketplace, our shopkeeper might just throw in an extra bunch of chilies or give you some extra ginger, because they don't have change to give back to you. They just throw in something in the bag, and then you're screwed. Similarly, if you're 100 grams over the limit, and you're going into an airline, okay, trying to check in your bag, and you're over the limit by 100 grams, what happens then? Explore that. Like, how do you what parallels can you draw to being a little bit over the limit, and how it can affect your life, right? You could be in an air trying to check in your airline luggage, and you're over the limit by 100 grams, and all you do is take out a shirt from inside and wear it over your own the shirt you're already wearing, and then it comes back below the limit. So those are angles of attack when it comes to humor. So that's an activity and a challenge for us, that pick a headline, find something similar to that in your daily life, and then try to make a joke about it. So let's do that. I mean, we already have the situation in hand. We know Vinesh Phogat missed by 100 grams. So is there anybody who wants to maybe imagine a parallel situation and find a joke there? So let's maybe she was disqualified for being a scene. What are you saying? Let me see if I can find your message. Weight of expectation.
फोगट में डिस्क्वालीफाई हो गई was my take.
फोकट में.
Vinesh फोगट में डिस्क्वालीफाई हो गई.
That's a nice play on words. I think Asim's joke is also pretty good, that the weight of expectations increased her. So you could maybe not just stop at weight of expectations. You can make it like when you have expectations on you, you can either respond in two ways. You could binge eat, or you can panic and not eat at all. So maybe this person, maybe Vinesh Forgat was binge eating because she had so many expectations on her, and that's what tipped her over the upper limit. But weight of expectations is a good one. I like it. Is there anybody else who wants to add a joke? Where's the referee? That's a joke you can make. That in Toastmasters we get 30 seconds, and we if the referee was a Toastmaster, that 100 grams would have been like the 30 seconds of grace that we get. That's a good one, Vinay. 100 grams haircut. Yes, I was thinking of this too. That if only she had a problem like mine, that 100 grams would have not been a problem at all. So that's a joke you can make.
100 ग्राम की कीमत तुम क्या जानो महेश बाबू.
I don't quite. Is that a quote from a movie?
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. Which movie?
Yeah, एक चुटकी सिंदूर की कीमत, kind of like that.
I see. So yeah, that's where that's how humor can be introduced into your daily life. Look at the headlines, look at something close to it, and see if you can find something funny there. In the case of Toastmasters and grace periods, yes, of course, that's a great one. If only there was a barber whose job was to shave off people's heads right before they went for the weigh-in, maybe she would have been in the contest. So that's another one, good one. But I think that's basically my summary of.
Sai, I have a question.
Yeah, please.
Hey, so I know we're trying to be all nice and tasteful, respectful. However, how would you introduce toilet humor into this? Because the instant 100 grams came into the picture, I had a joke, but I cannot say it. I don't want to say it. So
we have a few minutes to kill. So if you want to tell us the joke, and then we can see how to maybe finesse it so that it's not it's audience appropriate.
Okay. So the thought that came into my head was Olympian disqualified by 100 grams. Just let her use the restroom and she'll be fine.
Yeah, I think that works, except that
the words would have been a little different if I would say it in my own language, but yeah.
Correct. Now, let's look at the example of the elements of humor and see where we can introduce humor using the same ideas of somebody going to the bathroom to lose weight. Let's figure it out, right? So there is surprise. Where would you introduce surprise? If there's surprise, there's incongruity, there is embarrassment. So let's take I think embarrassment would be the closest fit for something like this.
Yep.
But if I was Vinesh Forgat and I was 100 grams overweight, over the limit, then what I would do is I would have prune juice and hit the bathroom or something like that. So you don't have to use the word toilet and potty and all those things. You don't have to. You can make it a little subtle, or you can talk to yourself that, there was one time when I'd gone to, when I ate outside and I had to sit in the toilet for the rest of the evening. Maybe that's what this person needed. Maybe you can talk about some experience you had where you ate at Parathe Wali Gali in New Delhi and you ate tainted food and you lost a lot of weight overnight because you'd be sitting in the toilet all night. So maybe that's what you needed. They could have overnighted something from Parathe Wali Gali to Paris. And there's another joke that it's actually happening in the Olympics. The Bulgarian team was disqualified or could not participate in one of the contests because their swimmers swam in the Seine and they got the water of the Seine is dirty. So the Seine River is dirty, and then they were not able to participate because they all got stomach viruses because of that. So maybe that's a joke there, that Vinesh Forgat should have gone for a swim in the Seine and gotten a stomach virus, and she'd been sitting in the bathroom, and then that would have helped her lose weight. Possible. All these elements are possible. So when to answer your other question about when to introduce toilet humor by itself is not offensive. Not knowing what the audience is willing to listen to and what the language they expect to hear That's where the real skill comes in. If you are not willing to meet the audience halfway, they are willing to laugh at your jokes, even if it's a toilet joke. I'm guaranteeing you this, that if you listen to any humorous speech contest in Toastmasters, there'll be at least one speech which will have some elements of toilet humor. But if your toilet humor is only for shock value, where you use words which are the S word, or you use poop, or you use fart noises, they are not audience appropriate. You need to remember that there's an audience which is willing to meet you halfway, but you have to meet them halfway as well. By which I mean, make your toilet jokes, but be audience appropriate about it. There is, I would never be the kind of person who'd say toilet jokes are not appropriate ever. That's rubbish, because we all know what we do in the bathrooms. We all are, we go to the bathroom nearly every day of our lives, hopefully. So we it's okay to introduce such jokes in Toastmasters as well. Just be mindful of the fact that your judges might not appreciate it if you went completely balls out and said poop for the S word. Know where your audience is sitting, meet them there. That's your job as a speech maker. Okay. Anything else? Does anybody else want to? All right. So back to the headline acronym, that's Sierra's. Surprise, incongruity, embarrassment, release, recognition, ambivalence, superiority, and configuration. Among these, surprise is the overarching element. Embarrassment is something that is closest to you. What is embarrassing to you is going to be embarrassing to everybody. So if you find yourself being embarrassed by a situation, mine it for humor in your speeches. You will find that others will laugh along with you because they'll feel embarrassed along with you. If you don't want to go that far about embarrassing yourself, you can always look for superiority. You can make the audience feel better because you made mistakes that the audience will never make. So you poke fun at yourself, or you poke fun at something. Oh yeah, on the topic of poking fun, when I said that you need to meet your audience halfway, one of the biggest mistakes we make in stand-up comedy in India, is that we make fun of people weaker than us. A lot of times, we make fun of people who are maybe not as smart as we are. For example, there's all the slapstick humor where there'll be one sidekick of the hero who's a buffoon, and we make fun of them. I challenge you to think about that. I challenge you to make fun of people who are stronger than you, whose behaviors are not appropriate or seem ridiculous for somebody in that position of power. Let's take an example, right? Now, we had the elections just now, and we learned a lot. We learned a lot of new math after the elections. For example, we learned that 400 equals 240. There is humor in there. You're not making fun of people who do Vedic maths, or you're not making fun of people who are good or bad at math. You're making fun of a political party which was expecting to win 400 votes, 400 seats in the elections, ending up with winning only 240 seats. That is where the humor should be. Humor is not in making fun of somebody who is already weak or already a figure of ridicule and making more fun of that person. Let's take an example of that as well. For the past 10 years, and again, this is not political. Please don't take it as politics. This is more insight into how humor should be structured. For the past 10 years, Rahul Gandhi used to be called Pappu. And it was funny, not because the name Pappu was silly sounding, but because we as the Indian population found some truth in that, right? We might not know anything about Rahul Gandhi as a person, but we believed that yes, this person is silly. He makes all these silly speeches which don't make any sense. He is reflective of a style of governing that we don't actually appreciate in the country. So Pappu made sense at that time. But then we realized something about him, and that name no longer applies to him. If you look at him today and you look at the kind of, maybe not admiration, but at least the kind of attention he commands, it's no longer the Pappu attention. He's no longer the figure of ridicule, right? So that thing can change when you are finding a truth in something, but that truth is no longer true anymore. 10 years ago, 5 years ago, Pappu meant Rahul Gandhi. Pappu meant a person who's a buffoon, or who's not a worthy opponent to the people in power. Today, that's not true. That thing's going to happen to us as well. We will find something which is funny today. We'll find something which is worth poking fun at, and tomorrow it might not be true. Let's take another example. You know why? So the other day, the Ukraine President Vladimir Zelensky was Volodymyr Zelensky was upset that our Prime Minister Narendra Modi went and hugged the president of Russia, and he was upset that he was Narendra Modi was showing support to the president of Russia. The counterpoint to that is that it's either Narendra Modi hugs Putin, or Narendra Modi gets what's called co-opted. What's the word for it? They get recruited into the Russian army and fights Ukraine. So you can find humor in that as well, because today the truth is that lots of Indians are being recruited into the Russian army to fight the in favor of the Russian army against Ukraine. If you find a joke in that and say, oh yeah, if Prime Minister Modi goes there and the says, you either hug me in public or we're going to put you in the Russian army and ask you to fight against Ukraine, what would Ukraine prefer? Would they prefer Prime Minister Modi hugging Putin, or Prime Minister Modi out in the field fighting against Ukraine? Because the joke is that Modi has this image of being a macho man. So you have opportunities of humor everywhere. So please look for it. And once you find it, stick to it, use it, and do it again and again, because it gets easier with time. You have the ABCs of humor have been shared with you. Your job is to go construct a joke out of the ABCs of humor. The Sierra is the ABC. So make a joke out of it, find the humor, and I'm sure you guys are going to do really well when the HSC comes around. Back to you, Bhavesh, for the remainder of the session.